Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute and the Resnick Hospital Board of Advisors, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind program with Dr. Daniel Lieberman, author of the best-selling, myth-busting new book, Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Lieberman with us today, joining from his office in Cambridge. He is a professor in the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard and is best known for his influential research on the evolution of the human head and on the evolution of running and walking, which he studies both in the lab and in the field in Africa and Latin America. He is the author of 3 popular books: The Evolution of the Human Head, The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease, and Exercised, as well as over 150 peer-reviewed papers. In his spare time, he practices what he preaches. He enjoys running. Dr. Lieberman will be joined in conversation by Dr. Barbara Natterson Horowitz, who we are very excited to welcome back to the Open Mind for her 3rd appearance. Dr. Natterson Horowitz is an evolutionary biologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and is also a cardiologist in the Division of Cardiology at UCLA. She, along with Catherine Bowers, co-authored 2 world-renowned books, Zubiquity and Wildhood, which we featured at 2 past Open Mind programs. Her research focuses on the natural world as a source of insights into human pathology and developmental challenges. I'd like to thank both of our distinguished scholars for taking the time from their extraordinarily busy schedules to share their knowledge and expertise with us today. A quick announcement before we get started. Our next Open Mind is on June 3rd, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, with Dr. Kelly Harding, author of the new book, The Rabbit Effect: Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with the Groundbreaking Science of Kindness. And she will be joined by Dr. Daniel Fessler, Professor of Biological Anthropology at UCLA and inaugural director of the UCLA Badari Kindness Center. Please visit our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org, to make your reservation for this event and to see a calendar of our other upcoming programs. There you will also find a link to our YouTube channel, which has a complete library of videos from other past Open Minds. Today's program is being taped and will be available for viewing there tomorrow. Lastly, the last segment of today's program is reserved for your questions. Please type your questions into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible in the time allotted. And now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Barbara Natterson Horowitz, who will introduce Dr. Daniel Lieberman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicki. And I'm really thrilled to be back at Open Minds, and especially thrilled to be given a chance to interview Dr. Daniel Lieberman. And before I jump into this conversation, we're going to be talking about his new book, Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. I'd like to offer a little bit of biographical information. So I'm going to share, and here we go. All right. We're seeing a picture of Dr. Lieberman. Yes? Hang on a second. Can somebody just confirm?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, here we go. So Daniel Lieberman is the Edwin Lerner II Professor of Biological Sciences in the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. He earned his bachelor's degree and his PhD at Harvard. and his MPhil at Cambridge. And instead of using the next 45 minutes to share his extraordinary career highlights with you, I've actually put some of them on, some of his CV onto this slide, but it really wasn't that much of it. I basically got the cardio for the day just flipping through all the pages of the CV. So needless to say, Dan is highly accomplished and widely recognized as a real leader and pioneer in this field. And his research focuses on the origins of the human body, its strengths and vulnerabilities, and how this evolutionary framework can help us better understand challenges in contemporary human health. You can see the covers of his two past books that Vicki mentioned. The Story of the Human Body is a wonderful book, which I discovered before I knew Dan, and I used actually in my course at UCLA in evolutionary medicine. So Dan combines experimental biomechanics with comparative anatomy and paleontology. He has ongoing fieldwork projects in Kenya and Mexico and an active biomechanics lab at Harvard. And he is an extremely sought after teacher, research mentor, and I can tell you he is also a wonderful colleague and friend. In 2004, Dan published a study, Born to Run, that argued that compared with other species, humans are supremely adapted to distance running. His paper, which by the way made the cover of Nature, nice, was based in part on his work in his biomechanics lab at Harvard, but also on his field work with the Tarahumara, who are a Native American people from northwestern Mexico, who are kind of known for their super athletic endurance and barefoot running as well. In fact, Dan actually developed some sort of notoriety around barefoot running, and I actually heard about Dan as the Barefoot Professor several years ago. And in fact, you can find pictures of the Barefoot Professor kind of everywhere, running around Cambridge, running with students. Well, that was a different book maybe, but still, it's very charming. And then, as his notoriety grew, in 2017, he received the rarest and highest recognition possible for a scholar of his stature. Dan was a clue on Jeopardy. That's right. It was Lieberman's for 400, Alex, and there he was, the Barefoot Professor. So that's pretty big stuff. In any event, over the past 15 years, he has traversed the globe observing how hardworking hunter-gatherers, subsistence farmers, and others use their bodies to better understand how and why the human body evolved in the ways that it did. Dan has tracked musk oxen with indigenous hunters in Greenland. He's played barefoot cricket in rural India. He's joined an ancient Native American foot race under the stars in Mexico with the Tarahumara. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. He's also raced on a foot against horse race in the mountains of Arizona. And all of these experiences, they do actually appear in this book, as does his legitimate status as an accomplished marathon runner. But there isn't an ounce of brag in this book. In fact, within the first 25 pages of the book, we learned that Dan was a pint-sized kid. He was a nerdy kid, he says, literally the one picked last for teams. His childhood associations with exercise included anxious memories of being humiliated by PE teachers, and he has a memory of hiding in the bathroom closet during first grade gym class. Well, there is so much to admire in this book, including the honest and very real telling of his own exercise journey. In this book, Dan has actually created a completely unique genre of exercise books. There is no preaching, no proselytizing, there are no reprimands, and the book is not prescriptive. As Dan reminds us several times, he isn't a clinician or a physician. What he is a gifted storyteller who, weaving together science, history, and personal experience, lays out the powerful central argument of his book. Understanding the evolutionary origins of exercise can help readers derive the physical and psychological benefits of something we never evolved to do. All right, now let's talk to Dan.
I will never lift that up. Thank you very much, Barb. That's quite an introduction. Well, thank you so much. And it's an honor to do this with you. So thank you.
excited to be here. Well, let's see, where should we start? I feel like this is a conversation that we've been having for like 3 or 4 years now. It's just a wonderful continuation. It was wonderful finding someone else who was really so interested in evolution and medicine. And so I'll just jump in with a question and we'll just take it from there. So let's talk about exercise and the strong evidence that supports its efficacy in the treatment and even prevention of diseases, including coronary artery disease and heart failure, and diabetes and hypertension, and even breast and colorectal cancers. And those are just the somatic, physical illnesses, mental illnesses as well. There's evidence to support efficacy of physical activity in the prevention and treatment of depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and even some forms of dementia. So, Dan, how can it be that exercise is so apparently healthy, yet it's something we never evolved to do?
Well, I mean, that's really the fundamental question, right? And I think to understand that, it really helps to step out of the Western world in which most of us live, right? Where we think it's normal to travel around in cars and eat breakfast cereal from a box, and think more broadly from an anthropological perspective and an evolutionary perspective. And that's one of the reasons I love your work, because you're so good at situating human biology and human health in its broader evolutionary context. And when you do that, you realize that physical activity is just moving, right? All animals engage in physical activity, right? That we move to get around, we move to get dinner, we move to avoid being somebody else's dinner. Every time you move your body, you're doing physical activity. But exercise is a specific kind of physical activity, and we define it as discretionary, voluntary physical activity, which we undertake for the sake of health and fitness. And really, that's something that only humans do. And in fact, it's something that only humans have started doing recently, when we removed the need to be physically active from our environments by using machines to do everything for us. And so, my travels, my studies, going to different parts of the world, I come to the realization that what I do, like I went for a 5-mile run this morning, just for the sake of going for a 5-mile run. Until recently, nobody did that, and as a result, although it's really good for us, we never evolved to do that. We evolved to be physically active in order to survive, but otherwise to avoid unnecessary physical activity unless it was rewarding or necessary. And I think that's why so many people dislike it, because after all, it is hard to do, and it's unnatural.
So I'm glad you used that word unnatural, because one of the exciting kind of experiences of reading your book was having an opportunity to think again about the confusion around the word natural and healthy, and how we evolved, and sort of the conflation and confusion around those kinds of things. So can you help us sort out what the difference is between natural, something we evolved to be, and healthy?
Yeah, well, I mean, natural comes with all kinds of baggage, right? When we go to the supermarket, all kinds of foods are labeled as natural, right? And it's kind of hard to but from an evolutionary perspective and an anthropological perspective, natural is something that's common to sort of all human beings, and in some cases common to all animals. And of course, it doesn't have a value associated with it. There are all kinds of things that are natural that are good for us, but there are plenty of things that are natural that aren't good for us. It's also natural to get upset, and natural to be jealous, and natural to be violent sometimes. So natural doesn't mean good. It just means that we are we are adapted in some ways, or evolved for it. And in fact, I think that's part of the problem a lot of people have with the paleo diet, right? This paleo diet argues that we should eat what so-called cavemen ate, which is a kind of a stereotypical kind of caricature of what ancient diets actually were. But just because cavemen ate it doesn't mean it's actually necessarily good for you. And just because we do something today doesn't mean it's necessarily bad for us. But it's so valuable to step out of our skin and our lives, and to kind of and to evaluate the pros and cons of what we do, because everything has trade-offs, right? There are positive and negative things about everything. And I think it's our job to try to dispassionately analyze those trade-offs, the costs and the benefits.
In your field work, you describe coming upon, I think this was the Hadza, but I may be mistaken, and just being kind of having this moment of this kind of take of that everyone was sort of, they were sitting around in the shade, and that there seemed to be a kind of the absence of exercise, let's say, the absence of activity that.
Yeah, I mean, the various places I've worked in sort of subsistence farmers and hunter-gatherers, and we have this idea that, I call it the myth of the athletic savage, that our ancestors were these incredible supernatural athletes. They were super athletes, right? And they could get up in the morning and just run 100 kilometers and lift giant rocks over their heads and stuff like that. But you walk into a hunter-gatherer camp, or you walk into a village somewhere in Africa or whatever, and most people are resting, right? And it makes sense, because and in most parts of the world, and everywhere until recently, calories were limited. People struggled to get enough calories to get by. And if you spend, like this morning when I went for my 5-mile run, I spent about 500 calories, about 100 calories a mile to go for a run. So I spent 500 calories doing completely unnecessary, physical activity. And if you're struggling to get enough calories, those 500 calories spent running are calories that you can't spend on something that's actually more important from an evolutionary perspective. And that's, of course, primarily reproducing, having children who survive and themselves reproduce, right? And so trade-offs are ubiquitous in evolution, and energetic trade-offs are really common. And so until very recently, energy spent on physical activity wasn't energy spent on taking care of your body or reproducing. And so as a result, it's natural and normal and adaptive, if I can use that word, to avoid unnecessary physical activity. And now we're in this very strange world where we have to choose to do something unnatural. So the example I love to give is that situation all of us experience occasionally, right? When you're like in a mall or an airport or a subway station or something, and there's a stairway next to an escalator, right? And we all know this, right? You have this little voice. I have this little voice in my head which says, take the escalator, right? And of course, there were no escalators in the Stone Age, but it's still a fundamental instinct to avoid that unnecessary physical activity, to take the escalator. But yet, we kind of shame and blame people for that instinct when it's completely natural, normal instinct. It doesn't mean it's to our benefit, but it's still a basic fundamental instinct that we benefit from overriding sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, adding to this sort of, it seems like a paradox, although I don't actually think it is that when a person like a person such as yourself who does a lot of exercise, probably you do get a pleasure reward from exercise, maybe not running up the stairs per se, but in a way that someone who was deconditioned and not an exerciser might not. And so can you just address that a little bit, tease that out?
Yeah, so one of the key rewards from exercise is you get a dopamine hit, right? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is kind of like it's a reward molecule, right? It tells you do that again, right? And it gives you it gives you a great feeling. But the problem is that if you are and it can lead to addiction, right? And the problem is that the dopamine really comes usually after the exercise, not before. And so the reward, you don't get that, you get the benefit after having done it, but it doesn't get you out the door in the first place. And furthermore, when you're unfit and people who are overweight also have impaired response to that dopamine system. They don't get the same dopamine response. And so one of the things that's really tough for people who are unfit and trying to get fit is that they actually don't get the same reward as people who are fit. So they have to work longer and harder. It will come eventually, but it takes time, and people need to understand that. So you go out for a run and you're struggling to kind of get shape, and it's not enjoyable, and you feel like there's something wrong with you. Well, there's nothing wrong with you, but it helps to understand that and helps to know that, so that you can stick with it, so that you can eventually get that reward. But it's an unfair kind of double whammy that comes from being unfit.
I have to say there's a real compassion and empathy in how you describe this phenomenon, and you're so careful, and you kind of shame the shamers. In other words, you really call out people who kind of humble brag about, oh, I only ran 60 miles this week, or I was, kind of that talking about how much exercise you're doing and telling someone who's doing less, that's not a very effective way to help them. And your approach is really quite different, to flip it and say that, in fact, not, kind of being inactive might be a more so-called natural state, but again, that we see this this shift. In a moment, I want to kind of get into mental health and what the evidence is, and sort of some of the mechanisms that may underlie the pretty powerful effect of exercise on mood and anxiety. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about sort of the history of exercise really in the last, let's say, 100 years. And I'm wondering if you can just talk to us a little bit about Ralph Paffenbarger and that whole story.
Well, maybe I can show a slide in a second, but let me introduce the story. So, and just to go back to what you were saying, the reason I called the book Exercised is because I think we, to be exercised, to be anxious and agitated and confused about something. And I think our treatment of exercise has made people exercised about exercise. And I think because basically what we've done is we've commodified it, we've medicalized it. And there's nothing wrong with commodifying and medicalizing exercise, but it's not doing the job, right? It works for some people, but it doesn't work for a lot of people. And I think that this anthropological evolutionary perspective can help us do a better job, understand exercise, both for those who enjoy it, but for the much greater percentage of Americans, about 80%, who don't like it and struggle to do it. So, but one of the kind of my heroes in the field of exercise is Ralph Paffenbarger. He was a professor at Harvard Medical School who actually moved to Stanford at the end of his career. And Paffenbarger was an epidemiologist who had this brilliant idea, because he realized that universities like Harvard are really tenacious about staying in touch with their alumni, and that they never let you go, right? They're constantly asking you for money. There's this old joke about Harvard alum and a Stanford alum and a something alum caught in a desert island, and the Harvard alum is just not perturbed while the other alums are running around, and that they ask, like, well, Harvard alum, why aren't you worried about being stranded on this desert island? And she says, like, well, the development office, they're going to find me, and so anyway, he took advantage of this and got the alumni association and the development office to let him survey several Harvard classes for decades. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you. The famous slide, the famous result from Paffenbarger's study here. Can you see that?
Yes.
So this is kind of the result of a huge study, right? So what he did was there were more than 20,000 individuals in this study, and they were followed over many decades, and he rated their physical activity levels here in calories per week. So basically, if you're 2,000 calories a week is running, basically running 5 miles 4 times a week. So it's not a, it's a reasonable amount of physical activity, but it's not a crazy amount of physical activity. These are not people running ultra marathons or something like that. And on the other end of this are people who are doing only 500 calories a week, which is not a lot, right? And then here he's got the all-cause death rate, so the rate at which people are dying. And I've normalized them here. That the one here means that the people who are doing 500 calories a week, you can see their death rate, but if you can consider that to be 1, the individuals who are doing 2,000 calories a week have a death rate that's 0.79 of that 1. So in other words, they're 21% lower death rate. So that tells you that in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, exercising has an incredible effect on mortality rates. But look, here he's got the 50-year-olds, and here are the 70 to 80-year-olds. By the time you're in your 70s or 80s, the death rate is 50% lower for the people who are exercising versus the ones that are not. And this was the first really major epidemiological study to show us what we've always known, which is that physical activity is really important for health, but even more importantly, that the older you get, the more important it is. And so Paffenbarger really was a pioneer, because that was really one of the first key studies that led to that insight.
Well, I'm going to ask you, evolutionary biologists love to be asked the question why, so I'm going to go in that direction. And in History of the Human Body, you make the case that the conditions that are more common and severe today than in the past, it's a consequence of our bodies being poorly adapted to novel environmental conditions. So, can you tell us what is a mismatch condition, and is activity deficiency a mismatch disorder?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the $64,000 question, right? So a mismatch, the way I define a mismatch is that a mismatch is a condition. It could be like myopia or cavities, but it could be any kind of condition which is caused by our bodies being inadequately or imperfectly adapted to novel environmental conditions. And the way of thinking about it is that every aspect of our bodies, right, our interactions between our genes and our environment. And genes change very slowly from generation to generation, but our environments, wow, they can change really fast because of culture. And in a blink of an eye, right, in a few generations, we've just transformed our worlds in terms of what we eat, in terms of the pollutants we're exposed to, but also, of course, physical activity. And we still have the genes of our ancestors. And so it's only in the last few generations that people have been able to live, people have been able to live without being physically active, but we're not well adapted for that. And really what you just saw in that Paffenbarger graph shows that it's not so much that physical activity is medicine, although we often talk about that, exercise is medicine. A better way of thinking about it is that the lack of physical activity increases our vulnerability to a variety of diseases. I mean, you can still live to be an old person and have a reasonably healthy life if you don't exercise. You just increase your chances enormously. And not only of dying at a younger age, but even more importantly, of getting a wide range of diseases. And many of them are chronic diseases that last for years and years and years and years, cost us a lot of money, cost a lot of misery. We can treat them sometimes, but we end up, it's better to prevent a disease than to treat it. I think most of us agree. And so physical activity inactivity it's not a total mismatch, but it's a partial mismatch. And really, I think it's almost like breathing, right? You can't live without breathing. You can't live without eating. And yes, we can live without being physically active, but we pay a big price for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's really as though there's some fundamental, macronutrient that we evolved to have, and it's like a vitamin deficiency in a way. It's just you don't necessarily die from it, but eventually it's going to make you vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful, I mean, it really works. I want to steer the conversation towards mental health. So, but I really like how you kind of challenge yourself to cast a whole bunch of very common disorders as a mismatch related to activity. So, but let's talk about mental health. And I want to actually dive in by asking you to share with the group what you've proposed for what you think might be a good thing for undergraduate education, that that PE be a mandatory part of a college student's life. And we know that there are a lot of physical benefits, of course, but spoiler alert, there are also some really, really good evidence for cognitive and memory enhancement. So Dan, should we require all UCLA and Harvard undergraduates to exercise every day?
Yeah, this is going to get me in trouble, but look, it's been considered for centuries that physical education and intellectual education were integrated, right? A healthy mind and a healthy body, right? It shouldn't be that controversial idea. And every American university used to require physical education. It was universal. And starting in the 1960s, American universities started stripping that away, and Harvard is no exception. I don't know about UCLA, but in Harvard they dropped the physical education requirement in 1970, and that's now only, I think, about less than 40% of American higher education institutions have any physical education requirement at all, and most of them are really, really tiny. And we're suffering from that for several reasons. The first is that there's the long-term consequences. You just saw the data on the Harvard alums, and we know that physical activity is important, and there are studies which show that that what you do when you're young, especially your college years, those behaviors tend to track with you for the rest of your life. So studies show that, for example, people who are very physically active in college tend to be more likely to be physically active after they graduate in the rest of life, and vice versa. So that's one reason it's important, but it's also important for mental health. And we have a, it's no secret, right? We have an epidemic now of mental health issues, and the pandemic, of course, has only made things worse. Anxiety and depression and various other issues, and of course they have many causes. But physical activity is part of it, and physical activity is also a great way of helping treat and prevent it. Let me just show, if I can show a slide of some data here, because I knew we'd talk about this. Hold on, let me get to that slide. So this is just to kind of show how powerful this is. I know this is like a lot of facts and numbers and stuff like that, but I'll try to walk ourselves through it. So this is a meta-analysis. So they've taken 13 different randomized controlled studies. So these are gold standard studies. These are the studies that you want, where they take a group of individuals, they randomize them into one group that exercises and one group that doesn't exercise. And then they follow them longitudinally for a long period of time. And these are just the names of the studies, and here are various numbers. You can ignore them. Here's the bit to look at, right? What they've done is they've looked at the effect size of physical activity. So if you're going on the left, it means that and this is on major depressive disorder. So basically, the further you are to the left, the more the effect of exercise is on this mental health issue. And in the blue areas are things that are technically considered large effects. The green area are medium effects, and the yellow area are small effects. And you can see out of these 13 studies, most of them show a very large effect of physical activity on depression. And some of them only show a medium effect. And study after study has shown this. I mean, this is not up for grabs anymore. This is not a debated fact. And furthermore, and that's just sort of long term. Here's some data on short-term effects. So this is from over 1 million individuals, right? And what they've done is they've taken the whole sample, and they've also looked at individuals who had previously had a diagnosis of depression, and they just looked at the immediate effect of the short-term effect of physical activity. You can see that people who exercised in recently, the past month, had 43% fewer days of poor mental health in the previous month. And in that previous month, also 11 to 23% lower incidence of mental health issues. So there's both a long-term and a short-term effect. And many studies show that it's as effective as any known pharmaceutical treatment. And furthermore, it's additive to most pharmaceutical treatments. So it's not like an either or, you can do both. And when you do both, you get an extra benefit. So I think that we're paying a price in our school system for physical activity. I can tell you the statistics at Harvard are that a large percentage of Harvard undergraduates are physically inactive, especially the ones who are not on teams, which is the vast majority of undergraduates. And we could help them and by nudging them. And I don't think we can, we're going to get a physical education requirement back, but we can and should do more to promote physical activity among college students, as well as among students in every level of the education system. It improves mood, it improves mental health, it improves cognition, it improves memory. The benefits are actually unquestioned. And why is it not more a part of our armamentarium? Well, there's a study which showed that only 20% of psychiatrists actually prescribe exercise to people with mental health issues. Why is that? Why only 20% when it's so efficacious?
Since you asked the question, do you have any thoughts about what are your theories? Maybe we'll hear from
about why we don't
about, it's really, the data is so compelling, and to have 20% of physicians only using this powerful tool.
Well,
why?
Actually, I think you're probably more qualified to answer than me. after all, you're the president of the evolutionary medicine and public health program. You're a professor at Harvard Medical School. You're a clinician. I have my own sense, but you would probably, I mean, I think you should answer that
Well,
question. You know better.
here's a sort of a few ideas. So on the most sort of sympathetic sort of casting physicians in a rosy glow, it might be that physicians are aware of the that there are significant socioeconomic determinants of an individual's ability to exercise. There are very strong correlations between where you live and whether there's someplace safe to, even take a stroll. And the amount of leisure time tracks with SES as well. So maybe physicians are reluctant to offer advice that that a patient can't, really can't take because they're not in a position to. So that would be kind of one very kind of positive, let's say, explanation. Kind of moving toward a little bit less rosy might be that prescribing exercise, maybe it departs from the kind of traditional medical model. Some of the sort of reluctance historically to use nutrition in healthcare sort of falls into that same, maybe that hazy zone. And by the way, one of the questions I'm sure people have is, okay, well, how much exercise and what kind of exercise? So maybe there's a question mark in the minds of physicians about that too. And then on the least sympathetic to physicians, I know a lot of physicians who are not so physically active and may not feel like they have the moral authority, let's say, to recommend exercise, even if they know it's the right thing to do. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all three make sense. I mean, and it's true. I mean, I think one thing the pandemic has made really clear is how, there's so many inequalities in the United States, and the ability to exercise has been exacerbated, just like everything else, by this pandemic. The data suggests that people of high SES, people who can afford it, have like gyms in their basements and stuff like that, and they live in neighborhoods where they can go out and walk and run, safely during the pandemic. Whereas people who live in have less space and don't live in neighborhoods with sidewalks and parks and places where they can run, have just not had the opportunity to be physically active. And so I think that's a big issue. And I think we it's one of the many inequalities that I think that we need to pay attention to, and for which we all pay an enormous price. We need to make the ability to be physically active available to everyone. And the sad thing about that is that it shouldn't be hard, right? It doesn't take a lot. You don't need fancy schmancy treadmills, and just going out for a walk or a run or something is a wonderful way for everybody to exercise, to get basic physical activity. But on the other issues, I hope that there can be renewed interest by the part of the medical profession to add physical activity to their armamentarium. Drugs aren't as that effective either. They're, from my understanding is that about 50% of individuals don't respond to a lot of pharmaceuticals that for treating mental health issues. So, and furthermore, they're expensive. And we're not talking about just the United States. I mean, what are we going to do in places like, other parts of the world where pharmaceuticals are less expensive? I mean, exercise is just readily available to everyone. And I think we just need to, we need to ask ourselves, and push ourselves to make, exercise and physical activity a vital sign, and to just include it as in terms of our sort of basic approach to health.
I wonder if one of the ways to make the argument more compelling for physicians is to kind of focus attention on the intersection of the efficacy of psychopharmaceuticals and exercise, which is really neurotransmission, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can educate us about why does exercise help anxiety, depression,
dementia? Well, I mean, that's part of what's so amazing about it, right? Which is that, I mean, look, here's the thing about exercise, right? About let's call it physical activity, really, because it's the reason it's good for you, for the most part, is because it's a stress. For that 5 mile run I did this morning, I mean, I was stressing my body in all kinds of ways, right? I was producing producing reactive oxygen species, which cause inflammation and damage. I was increasing my body temperature. I was causing little tears. I was denaturing proteins. I mean, I could go on and on and on about all the sort of stresses that physical activity causes. But because we all evolved to be physically active, our bodies have a host of adaptations to deal with every single one of those stresses. And in fact, we turn those on in response to physical activity more than we turn them on just when we're sitting around doing nothing. And the result is, I like to think of it, it's like, you know, if you spill something on the floor and then you clean the floor up and then the floor is cleaner than when it originally was, the responses to those repair and maintenance responses are a bit like cleaning up the floor after a spill, right? We overdo it. So when you exercise and you produce reactive oxygen species, you also produce tons of antioxidants, and you produce them in abundance that actually ends up lowering your overall oxidative stress. You lower inflammation. We turn on all kinds of neurotransmitters and molecules that do all kinds of stuff. And the end result is that we turn on this incredible, we don't even know how many of them are. There are thousands of proteins turned on during exercise, genes that are turned on during exercise, and most of them seem to have real beneficial effects. So let's talk about a few of them. So one of them is that you turn on what's called neurotropins. So you turn on factors that promote brain growth and synaptic function. So BDNF is probably the most famous, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which evolved, by the way, as a metabolic regulator. So it evolved to get energy available to the body, and then the brain co-opted that, and now it's used to kind of maintain brain health. Some people call it miracle grow for the brain. You turn on VEGF, which increases, and IGF-1. Again, these are neurotrophic factors that help promote brain growth and brain health and brain function. We produce neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, GABA, glutamate, and these are all lower in people who are physically inactive, and they improve mood, and they affect, when you take SSRIs, you're increasing your serotonin levels, right? Well, exercise does that for you naturally, right? So when you don't exercise, basically you have unnaturally low levels, right? You're producing antioxidants, you're increasing blood flow, the list goes on, right? I get kind of excited by all of them, but you're producing lactate, energy for the brain that crosses the blood-brain barrier. We produce opioids, we produce endocannabinoids that improve our mood and make us feel good and improve our cognition. So all of these things get turned on by physical activity, and if you don't do physical activity, they don't get turned on to anywhere to the same extent. So again, goes back to that mismatch idea that because we evolved to be physically active every day, not huge amounts, we didn't have to run marathons in our past. Average hunter-gatherers are to about 2.25 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity, but that's enough, right? That turns on all those things. And if you don't do that, you're not turning them on. And that's the fundamental reason why physical activity is so important for so many aspects of health, including mental health.
That is a perfect a transition to just an observation that when you describe in the field work, in a number of the places you've done field work, exercise is very social. So whether it's a foot race among the Arouette, the women's foot race, it's women together, or the men together, or dancing under the stars. This is really a social piece. And personally, I can relate. I love walking, and I always walk with a friend, even a friend on the phone. It's my primary, and it's a real draw. But and you talk about that, so I wonder if you can do two things for us. I think we have 1 minute, and then we're going to open it to questions. But I wonder if you can just actually just tell a story about the worst exercise experience you ever had, and what helped you get through it.
You must be referring to the 2018 Boston Marathon, right? Yeah. So that it rained something like 3 inches on us during the marathon. It was a nor'easter, if anybody knows what that is. It's like a huge, incredible storm that blew in. It was just above freezing. It was just miserable. And the only reason I did it, and I survived it, because it was a big social group experience. There was peer pressure, but we all encouraged each other. We all managed to get through this miserable, horrible, dreadful experience. The only good thing about it was actually finishing. But because I was in a group of people, we kind of helped each other. And I think that the key is that, remember, we evolved to be physically active for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only, right? When it was necessary and was rewarding, right? And I think the key in our modern world to help people be physically active is let's not shame and blame them. Let's be compassionate. But B, let's find ways to help each other make it necessary and rewarding, right? And nothing works as well as being social, right? So, I have a friend, a running buddy who we meet, he lives a few blocks from me. We often meet at 6 in the morning, and we decide the day before to do it, and I have to be there because otherwise I'll abandon him on the street corner at 6 a.m. Right? So it makes it necessary. But because I'm running with a friend, even though I don't enjoy the first mile or so, we're grumbling, and I'd much rather be in bed, with my wife, with this guy. But eventually we have a great time, and by the time we get home, I'm glad I did it. So making things social, dancing, running with people, walking with people, playing a game of soccer, whatever. That's the best way, I think, to make it both necessary and socially rewarding. And I think that's what we as a society need to do, because just commodifying it and medicalizing it, there's nothing wrong with them, but that's not enough. And if there's any basic message from the book, it's really that we need to move beyond our medical industrial approach to exercise if we're going to really help people.
Fantastic. Vicki, I think we have questions in the Q&A, and
Yes, we do. And I just want to, before I go to the questions, I want to thank you both for the privilege of hearing this conversation. It was educational, enlightening, and inspiring. So thank you both so much. We do have a lot of questions. One is from Susan. Are there studies on the benefits of exercise on the mental health of children? And I'll just add to that, I heard today that a lot of the actually private schools here in Los Angeles are making physical educational optional, which was pretty startling and kind of goes along with this question. So I wonder if you could comment on that and let us know if there are any studies.
Well, like all things, there are fewer studies on kids than there are on adults. But yes, there are studies. I'm not sure if they're the same quality and as long term and all that. But yes, there's also studies on the effects of physical activity on cognition and mood and whatever. Barb, you know more about this than me in terms of diagnosing. For example, major depressive disorder, at what age you can actually really diagnose it effectively. So I'm not a clinician, so I'm not an expert on that. But yes, there are a lot of studies on kids, but not as many as in adults.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a knowledge gap. There's some kind of disconnect between the pretty compelling information about, just the impact of exercise on cognition, on memory, on the kinds of things that schools and parents really should be interested in, independent of physical health. It's a question.
I know that the data on cognition and memory tests more than I do on mental health of kids. There's plenty of studies which show that physical education and play and all that improves short-term memory, improves long-term memory, improves mood in school, improves attention span. There's been a lot of data on that. I don't know the data on mental health diagnoses as well, but I'd eat my hat if it weren't the case that it wasn't also beneficial for kids.
And also we know, just in terms of moving in the wrong direction, that appearance-based bullying is such a huge deal in middle school, and that weight-related appearance-based bullying is the leading form. So and the relationship between bullying and depression, all of it seems like it's the wrong direction. But
thank you both. A question here from William. Is sitting the new smoking?
I have a whole chapter in the book on that. So I think we've demonized sitting. In fact, I think one of the reasons people are so exercised about exercise is that we don't trust people with the real the real information, right? It turns out we get this idea that that the chair that I'm sitting in right now is like this aberrant thing, and that that nobody ever sat until modern times. And it's true, chairs are modern things, but if you go into a hunter-gatherer camp, people are sitting just as much as people in LA or Boston. Hunter-gatherers sit about 10 hours a day. But the thing is that the data show that what's really associated with poor health outcomes is not work time sitting, it's actually leisure time sitting. So it's really how much you sit. If you sit all day at your job, and then you're also sitting to get to your job, and you're sitting to get home from your job, and then you're sitting all night long on a couch and all that, well, then that means you're not getting any physical activity. And so that you can imagine that's associated with a much increased risk of many negative health outcomes. The other thing is that there's a strong association with sitting duration. So two people who sit the same amount of time So, person A and person B both may sit 10 hours a day. But if person A gets up every 10, 15 minutes and person B only gets up every 40 minutes or an hour, person A has half the negative health, for example, cardiovascular problems, for example, as person B. And so what we should be promoting is active sitting, getting up every once in a while, getting up to, pee and get a cup of tea and pet your dog or whatever, or using a standing desk or something like that. All of that is benefits. But so sitting is not abnormal. Sitting is not, in itself, something we should demonize. Let's treat sitting appropriately, which is to say, just, hey, we all know this. Don't sit too much and sit more actively. But your chair is not out to kill you.
Thank you. That's very good to know. There are a number of questions here that address some of the myth-busting things in your book about knees. Sitting was one, about aging, osteoarthritis, and is it okay to exercise, or what does that do? I wonder if you could comment on some of those myths that you busted.
Oh gosh. Yeah, so each chapter I had fun kind of tying it to a myth. I think the most important one is I think aging, because we have this idea that as we get older, it's kind of normal to be less active, right? You go retire, move down to Florida or wherever it is, you kick your feet up and take it easy. But actually, I think that's actually a problem, and because as we already showed you, the data showed from that famous Paffenberger study, the older we are, the more benefit we get from physical activity. And I think it's because humans evolved to live long after we stop reproducing. So most animals, once they stop reproducing, and Barb, who's published on this eloquently and comparing human health with animal health across many species, the one thing that really separates humans from other animals is that we have this long post-reproductive lifespan, the possible exception of orcas and maybe a few other critters, but it's very rare. And the reason for that is that humans evolved to live several decades after we stop reproducing in order to be active. Hunter-gatherers don't just retire, they're hunting, they're gathering, they're digging, they're preparing food, they're taking care of grandchildren. They stay active. And as they stay active, remember, they're turning on all those repair and maintenance mechanisms we talked about. And that keeps you healthy, right? And it prevents muscle loss, and it keeps your blood pressure down, and it keeps your mood up, and it prevents Alzheimer's. People who exercise have 45% lower rates of Alzheimer's on average, according to various studies. I mean, the list is so long, right? And so I think that's probably maybe the most important myth. But it's also, we have this idea that running wears out your knees. It's like, like shock absorbers on your car. That's just not true. Study after study after study shows that's not true. Gosh, what were some of the other ones?
How about sleep? How about sleep?
Oh, sleep is a good one. Yeah. So yeah, we have this this idea that everybody needs 8 hours of sleep, and that that before electricity and iPhones and TV, people slept more than we do today. Actually, when people go into the camps I've stayed in and the villages I've stayed in, people never seem to get any sleep at all. I mean, they're crazy. Like, they go to bed after me and wake up before me, and it turns out that hunter-gatherers who have no electricity, no nothing, no iPhones, no television, no nothing, they're actually getting less than 7 hours on average. So we make people stressed about sleep. Now, it's true that not getting enough sleep is a problem. We should, and it's a serious issue, but we shouldn't make people stressed about it. Yeah, it's just yet another one of these things that makes people exercise.
Thank you. One last one was a chair without a back.
Yeah.
Tell us about backs.
So yeah, that's kind of fun. So it turns out that like the chair I've got over here as a seat back, but until the 19th century, people didn't have seat backs on their chairs, except unless you were like the king or the pope, and it was actually 1859, the same year that Darwin published The Origin of Species, that Michel Tonnet in Germany actually produced the first mass-produced chair with a seat back, and all of a sudden, middle-class people could afford chairs like this, and they became ubiquitous, right? And it's true that when you have a seat back, you can lean against it. You're not using any muscle, to keep your upper body upright, and so it may lead to weaker backs, and to less active sitting. So it has affected our health in various ways. But it's not true, by the way, and the book has all the references if you're interested, that slouching, like this, it's not true that slouching leads to more back pain. If you don't believe me, check the book out. I've got like 50 references on that. I really was careful with that section.
I think we have to arm teenagers everywhere with that information to respond to their parents.
Yes, exactly.
And to not slump, right?
Well, it doesn't look good, but it's not so bad. Yeah.
Right. Well, I want to thank you both so much. This was such an engaging and enlightening conversation, and we are really lucky to have you both. This was a really wonderful talk. And I think that now we should all go out for a walk.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be interviewed by such a wonderful colleague like Barb, whose work is. And by the way, if you haven't checked it out, check out the current issue of The Atlantic, which has a really cool article about her insights on why giraffes can handle all the pressure from their high blood pressure. It's very cool.
I remember seeing a picture of Barbara, you doing surgery was it on a lion at the zoo?
Something like that. long time ago.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, everybody that joined us for this very exhilarating talk. And now we'll all go out and go for a walk or go for a run and know all the benefits of physical exercise. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.